Heat check. Basketball, basketball, college. Basketball, basketball, college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa.
Heat check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball, college. I'm your host, Brian Ralph, joined as always by my co-host, Riley Davis. Today's the NBA Draft episode. NBA Draft is on Thursday. Obviously, a lot of build-up for this. The Victor Wembanyama draft. We're not going to talk a lot about Victor Wembanyama because we all know how good he is and that he's going to go first overall. There's not much intrigue there. The intrigue comes after, so we're going to break all that down in a little bit. But we are a college basketball podcast, and in the world of college basketball, the big news of the weekend was Bob Huggins stepping down and retiring as head coach at West Virginia after his DUI arrest in the Pittsburgh area. We're not going to take the time to dive into Bob Huggins and what it means and all that, because he's got a complicated legacy, certainly some positives and then some off-court negatives like the DUI. But this is a power conference job in perhaps the best conference in the country. Well, not perhaps, the best basketball conference in the country in the Big 12 that is now open in mid-June. And they're not going the route of Charlotte. The 49ers former head coach Ron Sanchez kind of left abruptly a couple weeks ago to go back to his associate head coaching job at Virginia, being Tony Bennett's right-hand man. Charlotte opted for the interim coach and to figure this all out later. West Virginia is not doing that. West Virginia wants to go all in on finding a full-time replacement for Huggins right now. That certainly leaves them in a bad position, and I think is going to make for one of the more interesting coaching decisions and coaching hires, certainly these last couple of years. Riley, as we're looking around, who are some names or maybe a name you're looking at that really intrigues you for that opening?
Yeah, I think if they want to go the high major route and get someone who's already at a Power 6 program, Steve Forbes is a name that I've seen come up some, and I personally think he's a perfect fit for West Virginia as far as, if they're looking to go to not pluck someone from the mid-major ranks and maybe, I don't know, take in my opinion, who would be a safer candidate in Forbes. And, part of this could be a little bit biased because over the last 3 years since he's been at Wake Forest, every time he plays UNC, I see him either play us really closely or blow us out. There's not much of an in-between there, but to where I can see firsthand what a good in-game coach he is and his X's and O's. And I've wondered, maybe I conflate his reputation a little bit. But, when you factor in his history of coaching in the Southeast, he knows the area, he can kind of get players into that whatever mid-Atlantic part of the country as well. And even culturally, he has a Southern accent. I feel like West Virginia fans would eat that up.
Yeah, he was at East Tennessee State before, obviously had huge success there. West Virginia has the NIL war chest that Wake Forest does not. And Forbes has expressed some displeasure with Wake's struggles in that area. The Beeline link is interesting because obviously he spent a good portion of his career there before he went over to Michigan. And he has turned down jobs in the past, the recent years since he left for the NBA, and has stayed in his role with the Pistons. He's certainly older. He's not going to be your long-term hire, but he is one of the better college basketball coaches, certainly in recent memory. You could argue he's one of the top 10 coaches of the last 10, 15 years. Taking into account he hasn't coached in college for a little bit here now. That is a home run hire immediately, and I think West Virginia is hoping they can lure him back, and I think those ties give it more of a chance than some of the other openings that he was linked to simply because they were high profile and he was available, right? I do think there are some good internal options here at West Virginia, but I also think that going the interim route there was the very easy out if you wanted to go with one of those guys. And the fact that they are not going the interim route makes me think that it's not going to be an internal hire. A couple other guys we haven't mentioned who I want to make sure we do is Jerry Calhoun from Youngstown State. He was on Bubba Huggins' staff. He was on the staff that made the Final Four in 2010. Really good offensive mind. He had Youngstown State as one of the better offenses in the country this past season. Had them winning the Horizon League title, regular season title. Succeeded in a very tough job and is certainly on the upward trajectory. Might be a year or two ahead of schedule for him getting one of these jobs, but for West Virginia, you're kind of in a precarious position here. Another one is Jeff Bowles at Ohio. Bowles has not coached at West Virginia, but has spent a good portion of his coaching career in the state of West Virginia, had a lot of success at Ohio. Those are two guys to me that probably aren't on that, John Beeline, Pat Kelsey, C. Forbes level. But if you go a little bit beneath that, I think those are two guys you're looking at that I think would succeed in the job and aren't necessarily the biggest, sexiest names. May not be something where you're keeping the entire transfer class together. But to me, if you're West Virginia and you've said you're trying to make this long-term hire here, that's got to be a priority. If you lose 1 year of a couple transfer guys, so be it. That's just kind of what happened. So it's going to be really, really interesting to watch and see what happens there. I know they hope to have it wrapped up sooner rather than later, so they can kind of get a hold on their transfer class and see if there are any more holes they need to fill. But certainly not something we thought we'd be talking about here in the night of recording on Monday, June 19th. Let's go move over to the NBA draft now. As mentioned, that is coming up on Thursday. Victor Wembanyama is going to be the first overall pick. He's going to go to the Spurs. That's end all be all. He's a generational prospect, does things we haven't seen for anybody who's 7'4", yada, yada, yada. He's awesome. We get it. You bored us with your excellence. After him is, I think, the most intriguing debate, Riley, of this draft, whether the Hornets are number 2, which I'm going to go on a little mini Hornets rant before we get into this debate at number 2, because this is the 4th time the Hornets have had the number 2 pick in their history. The first time they had the number 2 pick was the Shaquille O'Neal draft, Michelle and Shaq. The second time was the Dwight Howard draft. They missed out on Dwight Howard. The third time was the Anthony Davis draft. Missed out on Anthony Davis. The fourth time was Victor Wembanyama. Hornets have never had the number 1 pick. They've had the number 2 pick 4 times, and each time have just missed out on a generational talent, which probably like the most listless franchise the NBA has could use every once in a while, Anyway, that's where this draft starts, really, is at number 2 with the Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller debate, Riley. To me, this goes into the best player available versus fit option. Both these guys are obviously very good players. You can have your debate as to which player is actually the better prospect available, but how do you stack up both Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller? And then who do you think the Hornets should take?
Well, first, Brian, I want to say I can't believe you're not satisfied with getting Michael Kidd-Gilchrist after winning 7 games in 2012.
Worst team in NBA history. Got the brokest jump shot in NBA history.
Can't even get the number 1 pick, man. Yeah, despite my, Charlotte roots, somewhat ashamedly, I'm not really a Hornets fan. I'll care about them if they're ever good. Like if they knock this pick out of the park and he pairs with LaMelo to make a fun tandem for the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, I'll pay attention some. But I got to give the edge to Scoot here. I can't shake the highlights that I've watched of him, particularly from that one game he played against Wembanyama a little over a year ago, where he literally looked like the second coming of Derrick Rose, pre-ACL tear Derrick Rose. And I think when you see how effortlessly he gets into the paint, you see the creation ability, and he's got a pretty deep bag of dribble moves as well to create a shot. I know there are concerns about the jumper, but the fact that he does everything else well, it would give me less pause taking him at number 2. And I do think his ceiling's slightly higher than Brandon Miller's as well. And it just seems like over the past week or two, I've heard numerous draft-related podcasts, and every single one, there's someone who's more connected into the NBA and connected with front offices who talk about how great Scoot Henderson's work ethic is. And I know it's cliche, but that he really is the type of the type of culture-changing talent. And I think for Charlotte, that is really important because, you'd be playing in a market where everybody in the state cares more about UNC. They care more about Duke basketball. And there might be a year or 2 or 3 where you're not really playing for anything, and you need someone like that who can kind of help turn the direction of the franchise, and maybe helping guys get used to some winning habits to pick up.
I want to look at this from two angles because I think both the Hornet situation and the Scoot Brandon Miller debate are kind of two separate situations that obviously coincide based on this. But if you look at the Hornets, LaMelo Ball is not going to be the best player on the championship team. He's going to be a core piece, but he's not going to be the best player on the championship team. So you have to, I think, still draft around best player available, particularly because you're not going to be at this point in the draft, you would hope, very often, right? So to me, that has you go player over positional fit. Bring up Terry Rozier. That's their starting shooting guard right now. The Hornets. They have LaMelo running with Terry Rozier. Terry Rozier is a fine NBA player. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. He's under contract for 3 more years at $75 million total. You are not going to be that like a playoff caliber can do threats in the playoffs if Terry Rozier is getting up that much of a salary cap. That's part of it. That's a bad contract. If you're able to draft Scoot and fill that, you can look at parting with that contract. That's fine, right? Like that's not necessarily a huge deal. The positional fit. The other part of that too, LaMelo Ball shot over 40% on catch and shoot threes last season. He's shot over 38% from three last season, and he's certainly I think high 30s for his career as well. Like the concerns about him being off the ball, I think have more to do with the fact that he is such a good passer on the ball, as opposed to the things he does off the ball. And we already talked about Scoot Henderson more as being a scoring guard than a true point guard. So to me, you pair that with a pass first guy who at 6'7", like Amilo is, can guard whoever the bigger backcourt player is of the two. It's not like Scoot's small. He's 6'4", 6'8" wingspan, got a already an NBA ready body. I don't think that's going to be an issue for them defensively the way it was for Portland with CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, who were two smaller guards. I think the fit actually works if you were to draft Scoot with LaMelo. Still leaves you with a hole on the wing. The other aspect of this is that I think Brandon Miller is a very good player. And what I'm going to say is just in comparison of him and Scoot Henderson, it has nothing to do with him overall, because I think he's worthy of being a top 3, top 5 pick in the draft, whatever he ends up being. Scoot Henderson, the flaw in his game is the inconsistent perimeter shooting, right? Riley, he reminds me of a young Derrick Rose. You brought that up perfectly. The way he attacks the rim, his athleticism, just the reckless abandon with which he plays is Derrick Rose-esque. He can create space for himself off the bounce. He's got a good pull-up game, great in the pick and roll. He's just a little bit inconsistent from three. Shot selection is a part of that as well, but that is like the lone hole in his game. And it is certainly a hole, and Brandon Miller is a very good shooter. He's a very good spot-up shooter. Brandon Miller's spot-up shooting was like in the 100th percentile last season at Alabama. He was basically an automatic bucket if he got a catch and shoot three. It was not an issue for him. He also shot 25% at the rim, which is not great at all for anybody.
Where are you seeing that number from?
I saw it. I can't remember where I saw it from online. But I wish I could credit it. But
Hoop Math says.
What does Hoop Math say? So I might be wrong.
58.6% at the rim.
At the rim.
Hoop Math says 58.6%.
Still not high, not great. Okay, so he shot. We'll take that out. Somewhere said he shot 25%. They must be lying. But he's not great at the rim.
I heard something about 39% at the rim in the half court. I think that was a Vecini stat.
Maybe. Anyway, no matter how you cut it, he's not great at the rim, which at 6'9", you'd hope he'd be more than just a standstill shooter, particularly if you're going to go this high in the draft. And I think it's worth noting he had literally the worst NCAA tournament of anybody who played multiple games ever in terms of his shooting percentage. He shot below 19%. The knock on him coming out of high school and early on in the season, if you talk to recruiting analysts, scouts, both college and NBA, is that he played a little soft, and you could get into him and get him out of rhythm. I think that reflects itself in those numbers around the rim, and I think it reflects itself in some of that NCAA tournament shooting, because teams got into him. The first half of the season, he was inconsistent when defenses approached him that way, and then they got the SEC play, and he got rolling. Then got in the anti-tournament again, and the teams they played, particularly San Diego State, who beat Alabama, are really physical defensively and got into him. And he shot below 19% in those games. You go back and look at his track record all season long. Against NCAA tournament teams, he shot below 40% from the field. I know he does a lot of great things and things that you can't teach for somebody who's 6'9". And I don't think he's going to be this guy forever. He's still growing into that body. He's not going to be this forever. And I get that. And that's why I preface this by saying it's only in comparison to him and Scoot Henderson and these other guys at the top. But the idea that he is this safer, same ceiling kind of prospect, to me isn't true, because he's got a high ceiling, but there's also a floor where he becomes a Reggie Bullock type player in the NBA. I don't think that's going to happen, but there's a possibility he becomes a spot up shooter in the NBA. I'm not saying that happens, but it's like, if you're going to make the case that he is the safer prospect because Scoot Henderson could turn into Dennis Smith Jr. because he can't shoot. It's not like Brandon Miller does everything really well. You know what I mean? So to me, the reason you take Brandon Miller is because you think he's the super safe, can't miss guy. I don't think he is that. I think he's very, very good. I think he's very, very good, but he is not the surefire thing that Scoot is not.
See, I still think of Miller as a pretty safe, surefire pick. Like the Reggie Bullock pick, the Reggie Bullock comp for a floor. I get you said floor.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
just
like worst case scenario.
Has got to be higher than that. Like,
is it?
I know he had a lot of rough shooting nights post February. Like, if you look at some of the 3-point percentages, there's a couple 0 for 7s, 2 for 12 type nights in there. But he still finished the year, I think, top 5 in the SEC in true shooting percentage. So that makes me like, I'm still inclined to think maybe some of the inefficiency at the rim is maybe a little bit overblown, just because he'll still get a ton of foul calls. He's such a good shooter, even if it's mainly off the catch, that I think he can still be a really efficient scorer at the pro level.
And look, there were a lot of distractions for him the last part of the season when he struggled, which I also think you have to take into consideration if you're a Hornets franchise that is going to be welcoming back Miles Bridges after his off-court ordeal. James Bouknight just, this kind of flew under the radar if you're not a Hornets fan, but was found passed out in his car with like a gun in his hand, getting ready to go do some, like, the Hornets have a very bad track record. Then the whole Montrezl Harrell, felony weed dealing stuff. Like, Hornets have a recent history of like not great off-court incidents. And we're not going to dive into the whole Alabama thing again. But that's something else to take into consideration. I lean Scoot just off player alone. And I get the fact that the Hornets need a wing, but I think to simplify that overlooks a lot else in this conversation that I think is relevant.
I mean, I agree with you. Connor said LaMelo is not some dynasty altering player. I think for the Hornets, maybe they should just focus on winning a playoff series, and you take the best player available when that's kind of your
yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. Scoot and Brandon Miller are going to be that. One of them is going to be the number 2 pick. The other one's probably number 3. The Blazers seem pretty content to just kind of hang back and take whichever one Charlotte does not, which smart move if you're Portland. I didn't know I just kind of knocked Brandon Miller, but I would take him with the 3rd pick very easily. Again, everything I was going to say about Brandon Miller was not like on him overall as a prospect, just in comparison to Scoot. Do you think one of them, Wembanyama is going to, I think there's no question, at least right now, he's going to be the best pro of these. This whole draft class, other than Wemby, who do you think is going to end up having the best pro career?
I mean, I would still probably go with Scoot for all the same reasons why I listed as to why I have him at number 2 and why I think the Hornets should take him. But to go a little, I guess a guy who will not probably be taken at pick number 2 or number 3, I still really like Amin Thompson's game. I think it's always tough to know how exactly to evaluate overtime elite talent. But in those games, I mean, his athleticism and his body control are next level. The things he can do, how quickly he gets off the floor, how quick his jump is, it's insane to see. And the dude was throwing highlight reel passes multiple times a game. And it's pretty funny if you've never watched any OTE games. I watched some Amin Thompson film in preparation for this, and the commentators on the OTE games literally sound like they're out of WWE. Some of the things that they say and the way their inflection, their entire persona is this is one of the weirdest mediums of basketball I've ever consumed. But if Amin's flashes are legit, if that is who he is as a player, as this freakishly athletic 6'6" point wing with incredible defensive tools, who has this awesome vision, who can function as a primary ball handler and a primary initiator, if he hits his ceiling, I think his ceiling might even be higher than Scoot's. He very well could have the second highest ceiling of this draft. What about you, Brian?
I agree with that. The issue for him and his brother, both Thompson twins, is the shooting. It's atrocious. It's bad. That's going to be an issue, but they're incredible athletes. I don't think you're wrong there. He's going to be the number 4 pick to Houston. I would be shocked if he wasn't. I think the only reason he would not be is if Scoot or Brandon Miller fell to 4, honestly, and he got picked before then. Another guy I want to make sure that we highlight here, because I think Scoot will end up being the best pro other than Wemby. I want to make sure that we I'm literally blanking on his name. Hold on.
Cam Whitmore?
No.
Jarius Walker?
No.
Leonard Miller?
No.
Asar Thompson?
No. Pulling back up my draft.
Bilal Coulibaly?
I exited out of it just in case it was extra windows were causing the issue.
Anthony Black? Did I already say that?
That's who it was. Anthony Black.
Anthony Black?
Yeah. I want to make sure we touch on Anthony Black. He's probably going to go back half of the top 10, maybe even right outside the top 10. But he is a 6'7" combo guard who can play on and off the ball. Excellent defender. Created a lot for an Arkansas team that did not have good spacing. Needed somebody to create for them. Thought it was going to be Nick Smith. It didn't end up being Nick Smith because of injury. He steps in, plays a role he wasn't necessarily expected to play. Did it incredibly well. Did it against high-level competition. His size and the fact I think he's still just scratching the surface of how good it can be. He was a multi-sport athlete in high school. Focused on basketball late. The physical tools he brings with his size, I think there's a scenario where he becomes a All-NBA player, an All-Star caliber player. He's got to go to the right situation. Teams in the back end of the top 10, particularly we're looking at the Wizards now, need a point guard. He's slotted there. I've had him slotted there pretty much throughout my mock draft process. That might not be the best place for him or really anybody to develop given their track record and what things are looking like right now. But he can play multiple positions, both from a size standpoint and a skill set standpoint. He's going to be a very good defender, worst case scenario. To me, outside of that top 3 group, he is as sure of a bet to me as being a very, very good pro as anybody. What about somebody
I love Anthony Black. I think what's special
Keep going.
What's
Sorry.
special is his on-ball defense and his off-ball defense are just as good. And to do that, to perform that well, both on and off the ball in the SEC as a freshman, I mean, you see that so rarely. And I'm with you. I think like Washington would be foolish not to take him. I think for Anthony Black, I'd like to see him go somewhere else to develop, maybe somewhere like in Indiana. And I don't know exactly what the pairing with him and Halliburton would look like, as I don't think either of them are particularly bursty, but I mean, they're two pretty crafty on-ball creators that could be fun for Indiana fans, and I think that franchise at least has a little bit better track record of some development there than the wasteland that is Washington.
Somewhat. Now, what about let's go a little bit deeper in the draft. Sleeper that you like to go non-lottery, but somebody you're really high on making an impact and having a productive NBA career.
I'll go two. I know you said non-lottery, but I got to hit on one guy who I think will go lottery, and that's Grady Dick. I'll start with him just because
Grady Dick.
When I watch Grady Dick, the name that came to my mind is Cam Johnson, which as a UNC fan, that's pretty high praise there. With similar size at 6'8", 6'8+. Even their stats from Cam Johnson's senior year was somewhat similar to Grady. I think Johnson's senior year, he averaged about 17 points, 50% from the floor, 46% from three, which was just stupid efficiency. But, Grady got pretty close to that production, 14 points, 44% from the floor, and 40% from three on 83 makes. Really tough rebounder as well. I think if you watch Kansas, that's something that always impressed me, is that he wasn't some soft shooting specialist. Like, he wasn't afraid to kind of stick his nose in there and go and try to get a board. And I think he's a good passer as well. He's not really going to create off the dribble, but he can still make, skip passes, make smart reads from kind of standstill position. Got a lot better at defense over the course of the season as well. So it's like, if you can get someone with a Cam Johnson type skill set on that rookie deal, who's only a freshman or just finished his freshman year, I mean, that to me seems like a home run, kind of right outside that top 8. So second sleeper I'd go with, this would be someone who I think will go late first round, early second, is Colby Jones. And I think Colby Jones might actually be Austin Reeves 2.0. And he's really not going to get the same amount of foul calls that Reeves gets, but I think there's so much Reeves in his game when you factor he's 6'6", 6'8" wingspan, and he had averaged 4.4 assists last year, was like a 20% assist rate, who really blossomed when he got out of Travis Steele's system. But he's a really good touch on floaters and runners, can play out a pick and roll. Like, that part looks just like what Reeves is doing for the Lakers right now. And even their 3-point shot looks a little bit similar too. So I love his defense as well. I think Colby Jones is going to be playing the NBA for a decade and make a ton of money.
I'll need some convincing on Colby Jones, but I never thought Austin Reeves would turn into the player that he is. So, who can say? I love the Grady Dick pick, and Grady Dick pick, nice. And the comparison to Cam Johnson, I think is perfect. Like, I had not thought of that, but I think that is actually a very good, very apt comparison. I'm going to give 3, and I think these are all probably going to go in the 20s at some point.
Let's go.
First one being Bryce Sensabaugh from Ohio State. Good positional size on the wing, 6'6", 235, 40% from three, 48% from the field. I understand the concerns about the kind of lackluster defense and the kind of ebbs and flows of him really caring. I'm just going to ask that you look at the tape from the first half of the year when we thought Ohio State was still good and going to be something, in the games that it was obvious he cared about, because he was a huge difference maker in just about all of those games. When Ohio State's season went south and it was clear they weren't really doing anything, and he was getting a lot of the this year's Malachi Branham hype, that was when he kind of started to check out. I think there was a I'm going to go to the NBA next year. I didn't really think I would, and I don't want to get hurt now. I think there was a lot of that with him, and I think there was some checking out the Ohio State team as a whole in the last season. So I'm not going to knock him too much for that. If you're going to get a guy in the 20s who has good size, scores down low pretty well, shoots the three incredibly well, like that's somebody to me I would like. And I know everyone's talking about the Portland with the third pick, but if Portland gets him at 23 and slides him on the wing, I think that's an excellent fit there. Another person I'm going to go with is Chris Murray from Iowa. Main reason being he does a lot of the things that Keegan did, and Keegan went top 5. He's not Keegan, but he's about 90% of Keegan. If you're going to get 90% of a top 5 pick late in the first round, that's pretty good. I think I'll take that. The last guy is somebody who I am convinced, and you cannot convince me otherwise, will have a very long NBA career, about 15 years, and annoy every fan base he plays against. It's Jaime Jaquez for UCLA. He just does everything so incredibly well. There is nothing he does great, right? He's not uber athletic, not a knockdown 3-point shooter, but he does everything well. He was always in the right spot at the right time for UCLA. Really good defender, made shots from 3, made shots at the rim. He's going to be a role player. He is not going to be a superstar. But if you're going to make playoff runs and win big in the NBA, you need guys like Jaime Jaquez. And he's already proven he's as consistent as they come. He's a winner. I fully expect that to be the case at the NBA level as well.
Yeah, I'll get to my thoughts on Bryce Sensabaugh when we get to overrated players, but I love the other 2 picks. I'll speak specifically about Jaquez. And I actually, I might make my second Lakers player comp just after comparing Colby Jones to Austin Reeves. I think Jaquez is a different player than Rui, but it wouldn't shock me to see Jaquez being on a playoff contender in the Western or Eastern Conference Finals in a couple of years, either coming off the bench or playing spot starter minutes, who's just cooking dudes in the mid range or showing off a pretty good handle for being 6'8". And I think the comparison's there too with Rui. It's like both guys who played at West Coast schools, won a ton of basketball games in their careers. Like I love that Jaquez pick is a dude who would not surprise me at all if he's on a playoff team as a contributing wing in the next 5 years or so.
Why am I wrong about Sensabaugh? Let's dive into overrated right now. Why am I wrong?
Overrated for Sensabaugh. I think it's, like you're saying, if he goes in the 20s, I wouldn't really have any qualms with it. But I feel like in recent days, I've seen some mock drafts that have him in the lottery. I think I saw one the other day that had him at pick 10 or 11. And I think there are just way too many unknowns to take him that. You look at his skill set. I don't think he passes. You mentioned his defensive issues. You mentioned the motor concerns. Like, he's a great one-on-one basketball player. He can score in ISO situations. His bag, especially at being like 6'6", 240, is extensive and is crazy. But it's like if he goes in the lottery, is he going to go to a team that, just needs someone like him to get 20 shots a game and further like exacerbate some of these bad habits of where he's only looking to score and not do anything else, and he's going to be content because he's got a couple mil? Like, that's my biggest concerns with Sensabaugh.
Which is fair. Which is totally fair. I saw a different guy first half of the season for second half of the season. I do not know enough about Bryce Sensabaugh, the person, to know which way it's going to go. And none of us really know. And that could very well be in the realm of possibility, certainly. I have 2 guys. I have one of them that simply based on where he's going, and one of them just overall. So based on where he's going, the same sense as you, is Derek Lively from Duke. I really like Derek Lively. He has risen into the top 10 now, into the lottery, because there are no good centers in this draft. Interesting. Like, the best version of Derek Lively is a multi-positional defender, elite rim protector, lob catcher. That guy is valuable in the NBA, and I think Derek Lively in the right system, because you always need to be the right system for that kind of player to make an impact. In the right system, could have a very, very long NBA career. And I think he probably will, but a lot of it depends on where he goes. That said, he does not have an expansive offensive game right now, either on the perimeter or on the post. I understand that a lot of the reason, or some of the reason behind some of this pre-draft hype, is that he hit a lot of uncontested threes in workouts, which doesn't mean anything to me. That doesn't show me that you can suddenly now make threes. And maybe he can. We'll see. He did deal with injuries a lot last season, and we have to certainly count those. But my bigger concern is the fact that he was in constant foul trouble last season. It seemed like the pace of the game was too quick for him at times, and he is a very big guy. He's 7'2". He can get by with his length and reaching. But he also reached a lot because he could get by with his length and reaching, and that led to a lot of easy foul calls on him. And so that limited his time on the court a lot. The games against UNC, particularly Mountain Baycott, I think showed us the kind of player he can be, which is a really, really good defensive player, somebody who can have a huge impact without scoring 15, 20 points in a single game. But those performances were, I think, few and far between, as opposed to the ones where he was more inconsistent, made an impact in spurts, but got in foul trouble a lot. He's a guy who I would certainly take a flyer on outside of the lottery, particularly in the 20s, if I'm a team that needs a center and wants that kind of player. But if I'm taking that guy in the lottery or top 10, I think there are better options. And I can find somebody with similar things later in the draft. The other guy for me, just based on his game, is Jet Howard for Michigan. I think he's a first-round pick because he has size and his dad's Jawan Howard. We bill him as this great shooter, and he certainly showed the potential to be a knockdown shooter. He shot below 37% from three last season. That's good. Not great, not enough to be known as a shooter. For somebody who had such great size, 6'8", 215, he averaged less than 3 rebounds a game. That wasn't great. Lackluster effort on the defensive end. A lot of that rebounding was just a lack of willingness to box out. He is somebody who did not do little things at all. He did none of the little things, really, throughout time Michigan. He was a fine scorer, but wasn't somebody who consistently took over games when Michigan needed him to. I'm scared to take that guy. I'd be scared to take that guy.
Mm-hmm. Can I got to weigh in on Derek Lively because Derek Lively was my other overrated player besides Bryce Sensabaugh. And you hit on a lot of the reasons. I think Lively in the 20s, even if you took him like 17, 18, 19, would be fine with me. But I've seen those same mock drafts that have elevated him into being this lottery type top 10 talent. And I know Duke fans might think I'm being a hater. I think Dariq Whitehead is going to be an awesome pro and have a long career. So there's the little bone to throw to the Blue Devils faithful out there. But, you mentioned Derek Lively. I do got to say, you mentioned him in the UNC games. That game in Cameron in particular, he fouled out like 3 different times, but they just didn't call him for him. I digress. But he is an awesome lob threat, awesome shot blocker. But beyond that, he had 6 games of double-digit rebounds in his freshman year. He never registered a double-double. Did not register one single double-double. The closest he came was a 9-10 game against Georgia Tech where they won by 40. And this is at a school in Duke that features their freshmen. How many, whether it's wings or front court players, there have been plenty of front court players to go and have success there when he was the number 1 recruit coming out of high school. Maybe you draft him based on that high school pedigree then, kind of what he did on the AAU circuit and the prep school ranks and whatnot. But yeah, I just am not seeing it at all in the top 10. And I'd seen some buzz recently that teams might view him as having dribble handoff potential and use him as a playmaker. But he had some nice passes out of double teams throughout the year. But I mean, come on, I think that's a bit of a stretch to say teams are going to be playing him out of DHOs.
The things that Lively showed in flashes are intriguing. And it's one of the reasons why I think both of us like him later in the draft. But they're flashes. They're not consistent production or consistent things he does well yet. He certainly can, and if he develops that, then he's going to become an all-star, a guy worthy of being drafted in the top 10 in the lottery. A lot of this jump, I think, is due to positional need with the Mavs in particular at number 10, who may or may not keep the pick. If they end up trading it, I do think Lively falls back. But that's where the link is, because Dallas has needed a center forever. Dallas fans will tell you how much they love Dwight Powell.
Mm-hmm.
They don't. They have not had rim protection or a good defensive center to pair with Luka for a while, and that's where that comes in. We talked before with the Scoot Brandon Miller thing about kind of position reaching for positional need, and that would be one for me. Certainly think Lively can become a pro, or a very, very good pro. But just right now, with what we've seen, it's going to take some development and breaking some of those foul habits and getting some of those flashes to be more consistent. And that's a lengthy process that we've seen time and time again. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And I don't want to gamble a lottery pick on somebody who I'm not sure will pan out the way I want them to. Well, let's keep looking later. Let's look at some second rounders that are worth taking a flyer on before we get out of here. Is there anybody you like that's currently projected to go in the second round that you think will stick around and be a productive NBA player?
Yeah, I got 3. How many do you have, Brian?
I have one because I want to gush about that one immensely.
All right, you go first with your 1, and we'll see if they're on my list.
I love Amari Bailey. Absolutely love him.
All right,
I think he is incredibly versatile in a way that he does not get credit for. So, going back to high school, when he was a 5-star recruit, top 10 prospect, he was obviously the guy for Sierra Canyon. Operated incredibly well in pick and rolls. Excellent defender. Could handle the ball, shoot, kind of do everything. Not a overly explosive athlete, and is certainly not going to be the best athlete in this draft, or even a above average athlete in this draft. But I would classify as an average NBA athlete, which is fine. Goes to UCLA, 5-star prospect, has this hype. It dies somewhat because he's behind Tiger Campbell, Jaime Jaquez, and all those guys who, Jalen Clark, guys who were, all Pac-12 caliber performers and who had established themselves. He was not going to break into that rotation. So he made an impact as a 6th man, as a bench scorer, as somebody who could come in, very good spot-up shooter, handle the ball well when they put him in those positions, get to the postseason, right? Clark suffers that injury. He's out. So now Amari Bailey's starting. Goes into the starting lineup, has a much bigger role offensively. He goes and averages over 18 points a game in those. And we all remember the Julian Strother shot in that Gonzaga UCLA Sweet 16 game. Amari Bailey hit the shot that captured UCLA's comeback and gave them the lead. That made Strother hit that shot.
Right.
Like it was a I believe a spot up, but a clutch shot that he hit in that spot. He can play on the ball. He can play off the ball. He's an above average defender, certainly at the very least. He's shown you he can be selfless and team first, contribute to winning basketball, do what you need. He's not going to be, I don't think, like, a all NBA kind of player, but he is somebody who is going to be, I think, a 4th or 5th starter on a team that can make a long playoff run. And to me, if you can get a guy who that is a not probable, but let's say a somewhat likely outcome in the second round, like, sign me up.
Yeah, you're selling me on Bailey. I think, kind of like you said, just because someone has a high school pedigree, a good high school pedigree coming out, doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to put it all together in the NBA if they have a disappointing freshman year. But I also think it does mean you can't just disregard them. And I love everything you hit on about him being a selfless player, bought into his role, played for a really good team, and then had his moment in the postseason as well. So, but I'll get into my 3. The first one I had is Seth Lundy. I love having another 6'6" wing, 6'10" wingspan, who was just an absolutely ridiculous shot maker. Didn't matter if it's off the dribble, off the catch this year. And again, that's kind of like what I've been looking for as I went through this throughout the playoffs that you see year in, year out. There's always those wings who ended up being either undrafted, later first round or second round picks who find a way to stick on a contending team. And I think Seth Lundy has that potential. Marcus Sasser's another one who I like a lot because, it's hard to project small guards. I think he's only 6'1". And, I keep notes on my phone of my favorite, like, under the radar guys over the years. And I swear I always, like, project small guards wrong. So hopefully this isn't a kiss of death to Sasser's prospects. But just the way that he plays on-ball defense makes me think he can find a role in the league. Like, if you look at someone like Jose Alvarado, who has carved out a role for the Pelicans and looks like he's going to stick, it's hard for me to envision Marcus Sasser not being able to do at least that. And then the last one I'll give a shout out to is Jordan Miller from Miami, and just another wing who I think is 6'5", 6'6", but has a 7-foot wingspan. Yeah, Miller is freaking awesome, man, and that dude just is so malleable to a number of different roles. Again, was on two really good Miami teams and played a huge part in their Final Four run. How many of those fadeaway jumpers did he hit? Like, how many big shots did he make? Timely threes. I think he was only a 35% three-point shooter, but he made some really clutch buckets from distance. And I think he's just a smart basketball player who moves well without the ball. Like, winning basketball player, projectable role, can slide into, can do a number of things. Like, I love his ability to stick with the team too.
The one thing about Jordan Miller too, is very comparable to Bruce Brown, who just played a huge role in the Nuggets winning a title. Jim Larinaga will tell you that those two at least played a very similar role for him and did so at a high level. I love that. I love Jordan Miller. Like, he was such a key part of them making the Final Four last year. I know Isaiah Wong, Nigel Pack, Norchad Omier got the love, but every time I watch Miami play, Jordan Miller was the steady Eddie, consistent guy doing everything. Yeah, he was great. Is there anybody we have not touched on that you want to make sure we touch on before we get out of here?
I mean, that's kind of all the guys on my list, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on Sasser, just because I know he, very decorated college player, had his moments of being a bucket getter as well as just that tenacious on-ball defender. But what do you think about his chances?
Situation is going to matter a lot with him. I think he has to, from a mindset standpoint, embrace being a defender first, because he was relied on to carry more of the offensive load at Houston, as much as Kelvin Sampson asks anybody to carry an offensive load. And he is, I don't think he is good enough to be a primary offensive option, even off the bench at the NBA level. He is certainly good enough to score points and get you a bucket and everything like that. But in terms of his offensive skill set, I don't think it's hard to find for guards his size in the NBA. For him to make his money, he's going to have to become and really lean into being that awesome defender, which he is and certainly showed he can be at Houston. But I think he's got to lean into that a little bit more for it to really click and stick out that decade plus long career.
I agree with you completely on that, man.
All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Heat Check Hangout, your number one source for all things basketball college. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you. If you are not, make sure you find us on YouTube at the Hangout CBB. Subscribe there. Rate us 5 stars on all your podcast review apps. It certainly helps. We certainly appreciate it. All the things that all the podcasts tell you to do, we need it as well for the algorithm. It's very helpful. For my co-host Riley Davis and Connor Hope, I'm Brian Ralph. Talk to you again next time.
Basketball college. Basketball college. Oh, is that time already? Whoa, basketball college. Come on. Basketball college. Basketball college. Whoa, basketball college.